Welcome to the Better Birth podcast. I'm very honoured today to have the very wonderful Maddie McMahon on today talking about doulas. Welcome, Maddie.
Hi, good morning.
I'm so glad to finally have you on the podcast. I can't believe I've not had you on the podcast yet, which is I don't know why, but we've been chatting a little bit recently, haven't we? So it's really
We have.
lovely. Yeah, lovely that you've come on. Just for people that don't know who Maddie is, Maddie's a doula and a breastfeeding counsellor of 20 years, and she founded the doula training company Developing Doulas in 2007. She's written two books, Why Doulas Matter, and Why Mothering Matters. And she's also the founder and trustee of two breastfeeding support charities. She's also a mother and a stepmother to three of her own children, and she lives in Norfolk. Welcome, Maddie. I'm so pleased that you've come on to talk about doulas because um, I think I think doulas are really, really, really important, I think, when it comes to support for pregnant people. But I think a lot of people still don't know what doulas are.
Mm.
Lots of my clients that book on won't know what a doula is, or sometimes the person that's pregnant might, but their birth partner has no clue what a doula is. So before we talk about your doula training that you do you want to talk a little bit about what a doula actually is?
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, that awareness that you referred to just now has changed a lot in my 21 years. I know when I first started and I was telling people what I was doing, people would either think I was training to become a jeweler and were asking me to make them earrings, um, or they thought I was a dealer, and that was equally embarrassing. So at least now, I think most people, when they're pregnant, come across the word
Mm,
at least, and that's a massive leap. But you're right. I think there are still lots of ignorance and misapprehensions out there about the role. And that's not really surprising because it's evolved so much. One of the things that I think really surprises people is that it's not new.
mm,
It's just the name that's new. It's a very, very ancient role, and one of my little obsessions, because in another life I might have wanted to be an anthropologist actually. I really love looking into the history of these kind of maternal peer support roles in different cultures,
mm.
and it's everywhere. And in the UK, we would have been called the gossips.
Yes. Yes, I love. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I read this in Dr. Rachel Reed's book, the how the word gossip was weaponized eventually
Mm.
against women.
Yeah, well, I think it was a shortened form, or a derivation of the word godsibs, which meant sisters in God. And we were the women who would have come and supported you in labour, along with the wise woman, the midwife role. Um, and the boundaries between those two roles were probably a little bit more fudgy in
Mm.
the old days. We would have, looked after the other kids while you were in labour, got the man, making hot water and chopping wood, and served you food and supported you physically and emotionally through the birth process, um, and done all your chores for you for about a month after the baby was born, until you went for your first outing with the baby, which is what they called churching in the old days. You'd go to church for the first time, introduce your baby to the community. Um, and of course, when we all came bustling into the house at these times of transition in a family's life, um, you know, talking and making jokes and keeping everybody's spirits up, the men, they didn't really like it very much, maybe, and they'd say, "Oh, there's gossips coming into the house." All that female energy was probably a little bit overwhelming, wasn't it,
Mm.
for the poor dears? Um, so I think that's possibly why the gossip word started to take on quite a negative connotation. But I think we should reclaim it. I like it.
Yeah, I love the history of, reading about how birth has evolved over the years and how it's changed and how the different birth attendant roles have changed, and how we could go on a massive tangent about this, but how it's gotten more and more medicalized over the years. But going back to the doula role, so what you mentioned how the godships were kind of like, I guess, akin to a doula, the modern definition of a doula. So is that what a modern doula does? Kind of be that birth support and support that person and do all those little tasks and roles that you were talking about just now?
Yeah, I think in general, yes. I mean, I think what's changed over the years is that I suppose the role has become a little more formalized. And sometimes, but not always, we charge money for that to make this work sustainable in the modern world. And we can choose, some people only provide what we would call the birth doula role, which is getting to know and building that relationship with family during pregnancy, and then being there for them during labour and birth, and then popping in on them once or twice after the baby is born. And some people choose just to be postnatal, postpartum doulas, and some of us do both. And that the kind of that more modern formalized role and the word doula has only really been around since the early 1970s. It was coined by a lovely, coming back to anthropology, it's an anthropologist who coined it, a woman called Dana Raphael. She wrote a book called The Tender Gift about breastfeeding peer support, actually, and about how breastfeeding can go more smoothly just because a person who has breastfed their own baby is sitting alongside her, not necessarily even saying or doing anything, just sitting alongside her with unconditional positive regard. And she took the word from the ancient Greek. There was a woman in the household in ancient Greek, probably usually a slave. So the word does have some modern political connotations that can be seen as quite negative. And I know Greek doulas who call themselves doulas and Greek doulas who don't. And I know doulas around the world, some of whom prefer other titles. And we will see where history goes with that one.
So you mentioned the gossips, and how they would attend births alongside the local wise woman or midwife. And I think some people don't necessarily know the boundaries and the definitions between the two roles. So what's your view on where the doula's role ends and the midwife's role begins?
Yeah, well, rather than saying there's a big line or boundary between those two roles, I actually think it's a lot more useful to think of Venn diagrams, that there's an overlap. Both doulas and midwives really want to build a relationship of trust and mutual respect. We both want to get to know you. We both want to give you emotional support and practical support and informational support along the way. And we both want to hear how you're feeling, and build an environment for you that makes you feel safe. Because we know that when women feel safe, they their babies can come out. Basically, it's really quite simple. And so that's the overlap. And obviously we could talk for a long time about how much of that stuff modern NHS midwives actually have the time and their capacity to offer. But that is an overlap in terms of their remit. And then, but we're not going to be doing any of the clinical stuff. We wouldn't palpate your belly. We wouldn't listen into the baby or take your blood pressure or your temperature or anything like that. We certainly wouldn't be giving you vaginal exams in labour if that's what you chose. So our role is completely non-clinical. So I often talk to doula, to new doulas who are doing my course about how actually how you can describe doula support is with a three-legged stool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a stool with three legs is really strong and it can hold you up. And the three legs are practical support. So we might do your washing up, make you a cup of tea, do some light housework, hold the baby for a bit while you have a nap, all of that kind of stuff. Emotional support, holding your space, listening really, really hard, not just to your words, but what's in between those words, holding space for you as you work your way through this beautiful adventure. And informational support, which is, what I often call our doula's superpower. We're great signposters.
Yeah.
So we're not experts. We're not the ones holding all of the wonderful information. We're definitely not gurus putting ourselves up on pedestals. And we have no emotional attachment or agenda to the choices that you make in pregnancy. We just want to give you lots and lots of information on all sides if there's a debate, so that you can make up your own fully informed mind.
And I think that's an important point, and I think that key word there is signposting. So, in your opinion, a doula shouldn't be giving advice on what to do. It's more about making sure that that person is well informed and knows all of the options so that they can decide what they think is best for them.
Yeah, that's right. Advice is a little bit of an icky word in our world, isn't it? We don't like it very much because it implies, when you're giving advice, that you're saying things like, you should, you ought to, I think you must. And we absolutely don't want to do that, even sometimes when people beg us to. Because this is really important that you step into your own efficacy and competence and confidence as a parent. And that means making these decisions for yourself. After all, you're going to be making decisions for your child for the next 18 odd years. So let's start now in pregnancy. And because actually, unless you are making these decisions for yourself, and that means having all of the information to weigh up the pros and cons, the risks and benefits, then you're not giving legal consent anyway.
No.
And I suppose, what comes up often in the conversation with people who don't really know very much about maternity care is, well, won't the doctors and the midwives be doing all of that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's a really important point that you're going to be making those decisions for your child for a very, very long time, and that doesn't start once they're born. That starts once you conceive, or even before you conceive, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think if you're leaving those decisions to be made by somebody else, there's always a chance that you're going to look back in hindsight and regret making those decisions because you weren't the one that made that decision. Somebody else made that decision for you. I think it's really important that pregnant people and families make those decisions themselves. And you're right, in order to make those decisions, they need to have all the information.
And it's sadly so often not happening within those conversations with consultants or midwives. And there are lots of reasons for that, you know, time and resources. And sometimes I think maybe not even a deeply held understanding of what consent actually looks like, and why it's so important for people to weigh up this information for themselves.
Do you think this is one part of the doula's role that I think has really developed and expanded and become more and more prominent maybe over the years, is the whole information provision and holding space for people to make those decisions, and even potentially reminding people or providing that emotional support, so that when they go to appointments, if they take their doula with them, for example, that they've got somebody impartial there, or even during labour, having that person who isn't part of the NHS or the maternity system there to kind of make sure that you have that space and that you have that information to make those decisions.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the advocacy part of our role has grown over the years. But I think it's the way that we do it that is really important. You know, it's so tempting sometimes to say, oh my God, what absolute rubbish that person has just said to you. But actually, we don't want people to trust us over health professionals. You know, one of our main goals is, if humanly possible, we want our clients to have relationships of trust with their care providers, because we cannot provide them with clinical care if Mother Nature throws us a curveball. So they've got to have those relationships if at all possible. So what I like to do, rather than saying, oh, you know, look at this is the better information, is to give my clients questions to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I want them to give that doctor or that midwife the best opportunity to show the best of themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I guess
yeah.
I guess that really helps with the relationship building between doulas and midwives and obstetricians as well, because I think there is tension there when it comes to the relationships between the various roles. And I've seen, even very, very recently, actually, I saw a midwife on Instagram post about who you should listen to and who you should trust when you're pregnant, and talking about potentially not listening to or not putting um, uh, faith in or trust in the information that non-medically trained birth workers provide, like hypnobirthing instructors, like doctors. What's your view on that? I know I have quite strong views, but what's your opinion?
I just think it's really sad,
Mm.
because has she ever sat down with us and asked us what information we're providing to clients? Because 99% of the time, that information has been written and researched by health professionals.
Mhm.
So I'm not really certain what people get in a pickle about. We know that there's lots of controversy within maternity services, the clinical maternity services. You know, they disagree with each other. So what we're trying to do is to provide balance. You know, if they've been told a certain thing by a consultant, for example, then we might just send them an article that's written by another doctor that has the other side of the equation for them, so that they can weigh things up. If they've only been told the benefits of something, we might send them something that gives them the risks. And if they've only been told the risks of something, then we might send them something else that gives them the benefits or the alternatives, or what might happen if they chose to do nothing at all. And we might suggest to them that they ask a question about the urgency of this particular thing. Does it have to happen now? how worried are you? And could you provide me with some numbers, please? Because I can't really work out how important this is if I don't know my own particular individual risk factors.
Yeah.
Rather than being treated as just another component on a conveyor belt, getting the same care as everybody else, because human bodies are beautifully, infinitely diverse.
Yeah.
So yes, it does make me sad when health professionals say don't listen to doulas. I don't want my clients to necessarily listen to me. As I said, I have no agenda. They can give birth swinging from the chandeliers, as far as I'm concerned. They do them. But it's increasingly not that way between doulas and health professionals. You know, we have some beautiful, deep friendships with midwives that we get to know along the way. And I have a lot of midwife friends who are massive doula fans and who love it when someone rocks up with a doula. For a start, they get a cup of tea.
I think saying that somebody who has, I'm doing air quotes here, just given birth and done a course to become a doula, or done a course to become a hypnobirthing instructor or an antenatal instructor, and therefore doesn't have the skills and expertise to support somebody who's pregnant, I think is hugely undervaluing the benefit and the value that that person can bring to somebody who's pregnant. I don't think you have to have a medical degree or a midwifery degree to understand birth and physiology. And I don't think you need to have that level of training to be able to signpost somebody to good quality information either. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Again, it comes down to a doula is not providing advice. We are not there to tell people what they should or shouldn't do. It's about making sure that we're prompting curiosity to ask questions so that they can make the right decision. And unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't align with the policies and guidelines in hospitals or what the midwife or the obstetrician thinks they should be doing. But then I think potentially they have to remember that it's not their decision, because it's not their baby and not their body.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Really, really beautifully put, Erin. I think what gets forgotten a lot within sort of clinical maternity care is the soft skills. You know, this is what we're coming to the table with. And that's what we teach on doula courses, is how to listen and how to communicate in a way that is deeply sustaining and emotionally supportive, and in a way that doesn't portray bias, doesn't, as much as humanly possible, tilt somebody one way or the other when they're making decisions.
Yeah.
So we're just being that big ears, big eyes, broad shoulders for somebody as they go through something that is, you know, massively transformational in their life. It's pregnancy isn't just about growing a baby in a uterus. You know, there's so much more than that. This whole person is becoming somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they're turning into a mother, and it's massive, and they require a certain amount of counselling through that, you know.
And I think that's the sad reality of the current, maternity system, is that midwives, I think, want to provide that support, and they want to be that listening ear, and they want to provide that emotional support. But in reality, the way that, appointments are timed, and the fact that they quite often people don't get continuity of carer, so they don't see the same midwife all the time, that midwives are not able to provide that emotional support and that counselling consistently.
No, they can't. can't. They can't have an hour-long conversation about your worry about your older child accepting the new baby, or what are we going to do with the dog when we're in labour, or is this marriage going to make it through this new baby? And even worse, doulas are picking up on things like domestic abuse, and all sorts of other things that are getting missed now by an NHS that is really not fit for purpose.
Yeah. So I think doulas can play a huge important role. I think there's a place for everybody in a person's pregnancy and their journey. I think doulas have huge value. I unfortunately didn't know about doulas with my first pregnancy, and
I know, same.
to be
Annoying, eh?
doing the job that I do now if my birth hadn't gone the way that it did. So I do feel like there is a reason for the journey that I've been on. But I did have doulas at my second and my third births. And honestly, I tell everybody to hire a doula if it's something that's affordable for them, because I think it's well, I know for a fact my second birth would have gone differently if I didn't have a doula there who actively, kind of reminded me, you don't have to do XYZ if you don't want to. If you want time to think about it, you do have time. She printed out the NICE guidelines for me, because the obstetrician that came to see me wasn't following NICE guidelines anyway with his recommendation, and did, provide time and space and prompt thought so that I made a decision that I felt was right. And it was a very coercive conversation that was happening at the time. So that's my whole birth would have been very different if I hadn't have had that doula there. I think there's massive value of having that independent support and somebody who is trained to listen. Listening is a skill. I have to put my hand up. I'm really crap at it sometimes, well, quite often. You have to ask my husband, but it's a skill that you have to develop and you have to practice. And I guess that's a skill that people learn and develop once they train to be a doula.
Absolutely. It's one of the biggest parts of my doula course anyway, is listening skills. We spend a lot of time talking about them, practicing them, dreaded role plays, but it's important. And we ask people to go out there into the world as part of their course and listen to their families and their friends as well. And that's one reason I think that why doing a doula course can be so personally transformational. It's not just a professional step. It changes you as a person, and it changes the relationships that you have in the world, because you're interacting with people often in a really different way. And people come back to me and say, oh my God, my marriage is better, my friendships are better, my relationship with my parents has changed. Yeah, it's big.
Yeah. What other, apart from the listening skills and so on, what other things do you think are really important in a really good doula training course?
Well, we've mentioned signposting, and we talk a lot about evidence-based practice and what that means, and that ideally we want to signpost people to information that is as evidence-based as possible, but also with an understanding that sometimes, and for some people, evidence isn't important, and that there are traditional things that we might do in pregnancy and in labour that haven't necessarily been researched, but that anecdotally many people find really beautifully supportive, and that's okay. And we talk a lot about the physiology. Obviously, we need to understand what's happening inside somebody's body when they're growing and having a baby. We talk a lot about infant feeding and the kind of the inherent needs of new parents, how can we support the environment postnatally in that first sort of month to 6 weeks. And we also talk about, you know, being a doula. What does it mean? What are our boundaries? How might we navigate sticky situations? And how do we create community for ourselves? Because being a doula by yourself is lonely and hard. Yeah. You know, we go on call. That's a big deal. You know, if you're going to be a birth doula, then you have got to put a month of your life aside and not go on holiday and have your phone on loud all night long. That's a mental load that we're carrying, often on top of the mental load of motherhood. So how do we navigate that, and how do we get support for that from mentors, from our local doula community? And, you know, working together collaboratively with other doulas is not only fun and makes for deep friendships, but just makes the work easier, and crucially means that the families that we're supporting in our community are wrapped around with a gorgeous community of doulas and antenatal teachers and all of those other kinds of people who are all maybe going to bring a little bit, you know, jigsaw piece to your puzzle when you've just had a baby.
Yeah, I think community is so important, and I think as a birth worker myself, and supporting pregnant people, the reality is you're going to see a lot of complex situations. You know, people bring their own trauma, which you end up witnessing or experiencing secondhand, or if you're a birth doula, you know, firsthand, and having support and space to be able to debrief those things and you know, talk through those things and get support, I think is really valuable. So I think that's a really important part actually of birth work. If someone was looking to go into birth work, is making sure that you do have access to a network so that you do have your own emotional support.
Yeah, it's crucial, really, you know, and that's why the doula world, you know, we have mentoring deeply at the heart of everything we do. And there are these days various mentoring schemes that you can tap into once you've done your doula course. And that means you've got your own doula. That's just so important, because how can you pass on this beautiful support, this unconditional support, non-judgmental, if you haven't received it?
Mm. So if somebody wants to, if someone's pregnant and they want to find a doula, or if somebody is interested in becoming a doula, where would you suggest they go?
Well, obviously, I'd like them to come my way. They can check out my website, which is developingdoulas.co.uk. If you're pregnant and you might be looking for a doula, then there's a directory on there. Just click on Find a Doula, and you can filter your search in lots of different ways in order to find a doula that might resonate with you and who's in your local area. And there's lots of information on that website too about becoming a doula, if that's a little itch that you're thinking you might like to scratch. And I have a calendar on there so that you can pick a convenient time to give me a call. Everyone who's considering doing a doula course should talk to some doula course providers. You can't make a decision just by reading. You've got to hear that voice and feel like you resonate with not just that person, but the community that they're holding space for. And you need some space to ask questions and share your worries and concerns. So you can, give me a call, we have a chat, and then I hold your hand to take that next step if that's what you decide you want to do.
And by the way, I also think that everything you've just said applies to picking your own doula if you're pregnant. I think it's
Yes,
really important
yes.
that you don't just pick the first doula that you find. You have to interview lots of doulas, and then you will find the one that you feel comfortable with. I interviewed several for my last birth, um, and the doula that I chose, um, I knew instantly, pretty much before she even opened her mouth, that she was my doula. It was almost like a aura or a vibe or whatever you want to call it. I instantly felt relaxed with her, and everybody else was lovely. I would have been happy with. And the doula that I chose for my last birth hadn't actually attended any births yet when I met her. She was newly qualified.
I love that. I
Um,
love that you said that, Erin, because it's such a worry for
mm,
new doulars. Why would anybody choose me when I haven't
honestly,
had any experience? And I just say, no, they're choosing you. They're not choosing your experience. You come with all of that wonderful life wisdom and your personality that people are just going to buy into. So yeah, thank you for saying that, Erin.
yeah, no, I didn't care how much experience she had. It was important to me that I felt comfortable and safe with that person.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, she was amazing. And again, saved my birth because I had very noisy midwives and they were lovely, but they were very chatty and they stalled my labor. And she suggested that we kick everybody out, which I did. And, things progressed when I was left on my own. And then we very hurriedly called everyone back and said, come back. And then I had my home birth. But I reckon I probably would have ended up being transferred to hospital from my home birth because things had stalled if I didn't have to doula there. So,
Yeah,
okay.
we do develop those skills of being able to gently hold the space without um, putting anyone's nose out of joint.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's an important skill to have, definitely. Um, Thank you so much for your time today, Maddie. I feel like I could just keep on talking to you for hours, but I think we'll stop there. So you've mentioned the Developing Doulas website. Do you have any social media accounts that people can follow you on?
Mhm. Yeah, so they can find Developing Doulas on Instagram, and we have a Facebook page as well. And I'm Doula Maddie on TikTok. I don't do it very much, but there are a few little videos up there, and Doula Maddie on Threads as well. New on Threads. So easy to find. And you can find my books in all good bookshops. The publisher is Pinter and Martin. Authors get a teeny tiny little bit more royalties when you buy not from Amazon.
Yeah, I don't suggest people buy from Amazon anyway, to be. The Why Matters book series by Pinter and Martin are fantastic.
So good.
Really,
Yeah.
really good. So yeah, go buy the books because they're really, really good.
I'm
Thank
on Audible as well. I did them on Audible. So if you like it, if you like my voice, you can listen.
Oh, amazing. Oh, that's really good. Okay, yeah, definitely go and do that as well. Thank you so much for your time today, Maddie. I've really enjoyed chatting to you.
You too, Erin.
Take care.
Thank you.